Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And we are really looking forward to this program because I think it's going to open your eyes to some ways of doing things that aren't very common, which is really unfortunate. I never planned on it. I never wanted it. But it happened, and it happens to some of us. My mother and my father have been married for 65 and a half years, father 91, mother 88. And as far as I know, there has never been an instance in those 65 and a half years where they contemplated going their own separate ways. Well, unfortunately, my brother and I, unlike my sisters, have been through at least one divorce. Again, I didn't want to do it, but stuff happens, okay? And I'm grateful that my sisters have stayed with and been with the same man from the very beginning. So I'm glad about that. Why do I bring that up? Well, because divorce, as we call it, and as I learned, is a lawsuit. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought it was called divorce. Well, it's no fun, especially if you have an attorney on either side that is out for blood. Yours, if it's your spouse, or your spouse's blood if it's your attorney. I kind of had that. My wife's attorney was more interested in nailing me and my wife's sister, pun intended, because she had used him also as her divorce attorney. So there you go. Well, my attorney was a woman whose slogan was, and this ties into what we're going to talk about today. Her slogan was reasonable solutions for reasonable people. Well, apparently my former wife's attorney was not a reasonable individual. He was referred to even by my attorney as a snake. She knew him well. There are a lot of them out there. Well, today we're going to untangle a lot of this and help you maybe de-dramatize a little this process, because it's a little death. It really is, like losing a job, let alone losing a loved one. Untangling your marriage. This is a guide to collaborative divorce. Sounds almost oxymoronish, if you will. My guest is attorney Nanci Smith, Esquire. Thank you so much for joining us, barrister, here on the program. It's really a pleasure to try to bring some civility to this kind of a situation that, unfortunately, again, is all too common in our society.
I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
This is something that, again, I don't know what the statistics show right now. You might know better than I. At one point, even in the 70s, and I was a teenager, it was 50%, or right around the 50 percentile level of people who stay together versus people who divorce. Is that still the case, or is it even higher?
No, it's still about the case. For first marriages, it's still hovering around 50%. The younger generation are waiting longer to get married, so that's starting to skew the statistics. But on the other hand, baby boomers and gray divorces are on the rise. And then for second marriages or third, it's about 75% of those marriages end in divorce. So it's a really common phenomenon in our culture, yet it's still fraught with a lot of shame and blame. And that's what I'd like to talk about, how to go through a divorce process with some degree of dignity and grace. I think it can be done, but it needs the public to be aware that it's an option and that they can start advocating for what they truly want.
I do remember a statement made by my former wife. I use that term because even though we don't have any communication right now, and it's been 25 years, I don't see any reason to communicate with her because she really hasn't changed much from my perspective when I have talked with her, and it's been a number of years. It's still, for me, it's depressing to talk because I don't know I don't know what's going on, obviously. Um, but what's so sad is that people will come together, first date, second date, third date, et cetera, et cetera. They will develop this relationship, this friendship, this connection, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes they'll then eventually get married, live together maybe for a while, and then get married. And they're building and building and building and trying to get closer and closer and closer. And then there's this something that happens. And then suddenly they become enemies. And it's so disconcerting to me. But one statement my wife made to me over the conference table at her attorney's office was, well, you promised that you would, blah, 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 blah. I said, the moment you got an attorney, everything changed. And I still believe that. But I also then, once the divorce was over, and of course I was also with my present wife, I said, I am going to do everything in my power to make this work. I'm not doing that again. I'm not. I say this with tongue in cheek. I will die first before I go through that process again. Do you see that as something that's really missing, especially the first time through, where for some reason divorce seems to be the way out? It's almost like a secret trap door that, yeah, let's see, if I find that she's been doing this, that, or the other thing, or I just don't want to stay anymore, off I go to divorce.
Well, Richard, as you've experienced, it's a complex situation, right? Relationships are complex. Being human is complex. Showing up authentically in a relationship is not easy. I don't feel in our culture we're awfully skilled in our emotional intelligence. We don't spend a lot of time talking about how to advocate for our own needs. I think people are afraid of speaking their truth in a marriage because of a variety of reasons, but often they're afraid they're going to end up divorced if they actually advocate and say what they really want. And then the irony, of course, is that you end up divorced because your communication is so poor. So if we had spent a little more time on our own internal insight and our own work, and then we brought our whole selves to a relationship, then I think you might be able to work through whatever issue arises in a long-term relationship. But since that's not necessarily the case, at least for 50% of us, something will happen. And then divorce is an option to get out of a marriage that is not working for one of you or both of you. And ideally, you want to come to the point where both of you can accept that this decision to divorce and separate is going to be a good decision for both of you. And that acceptance comes late in the grieving process. And so what I would suggest is that people need to recognize that divorce, as you alluded to, is about loss. It's about grief. And people grieve their losses in different ways and in different times, and you cannot rush that process. And so from my experience, somebody who comes to me and wants to get divorced, they've been thinking about it. If they're the person initiating the divorce, they've been thinking about it for probably about a year, but they have not had the courage to say anything about it to anybody, maybe to their therapist if they've been in therapy. But this may be the first time that they're even coming to terms with the idea of even talking to a divorce lawyer. And that's a shocking moment in anyone's life, whether you're initiating it or you're on the receiving end, which is also awful, where you're feeling completely blindsided as if, the proverbial rug has been pulled out from under you and you are now on your knees and feeling quite crushed. And all of your family of origin stuff comes up, your attachment issues, your abandonment issues. I never want to underestimate the impact of rejection on the human spirit. It is profound, and it sends people into a tailspin, which is why I think people tend to behave badly, especially at the beginning of their divorces. That's why they, I think, want to find a lawyer who can, quote, protect them, close quote. They don't even know what they need protection from, but I would submit it's protecting them from the pain, from fully feeling the pain and the sadness and the grief. And yet our system, the adversarial system, is set up to make enemies out of former spouses. And that's why I think the new paradigm shift is toward a collaborative model where people can come to it with their full humanity on display the team can hold that container safely, and people can just go through their grieving process with some, mutual respect. That's really it. It's just a mutual respect thing.
Yeah. Nanci Smith, my guest, attorney at law. She is talking to us about Untangling Your Marriage. It's a guide to collaborative divorce as we talk with her here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it's a great pleasure to have attorney Nanci Smith here with us, nancysmith.com. By the way, Nanci is spelled with an I, so don't forget that when you go to nancysmithlaw.com to find out more about the work that she's doing. Maybe she can assist you in finding a lawyer in your area to do this. One of the things that I have to talk to on this issue is it is a grieving process because it is a loss. It's big time. And you do have to, whether or not you are the initiator or the receiver of the initiation, I have to say, and I was really surprised that I was actually able to make this joke. I was served at my place of employment by my wife, by the whoever it was, the process server. And is Richard here? Yeah, over here. Yeah, can I help you? Not even, had no clue. You have been served. Really? So I open it up and it's the divorce papers. I was served on May 1st of 1998. And I was able to make the joke, this gives a whole new meaning to the phrase Mayday. I was a basket case emotionally for the entire month of May. Couldn't think straight. I found this attorney, Reasonable Solutions for Reasonable People. I went to her with my offer, my 4 points. You get this and this, I get this and this, and we go our separate ways. To make this portion of the story short, when the divorce was over, that was the very arrangement that they accepted, which pissed me off, pardon me, folks, to no end, because I had spent now 9 months going through this stupid process, and $3,600 later, which I got off cheap. This was in Arizona. And I thought, why? And of course, what her attorney was trying to do was get me saddled with what they called spousal support, alimony, whatever you want to call it. But Arizona being a community property state, it doesn't work that way. You better check the laws in your state for what it is. But the whole aspect of grieving, I just wanted out. And I don't know that I've ever really grieved in that context. I just finished being a part of a production, on-stage production that I'd never done before. And when it was over, the day after, I was in tears over the fact that it was over. I was grieving over that loss. I didn't have that with the divorce. Am I missing something, or is my process, because of my perspective, is it different than anybody else's? Or something wrong with me? Do I need therapy?
Well, no, I think everybody needs therapy, but especially when you're going through a divorce. But so that's no shame on you. But I think your experience speaks to the problem that I consider it to be an aggressive act to file for your divorce papers first before negotiating. So I'm a negotiate first kind of girl, and then we can put your paperwork together with the court in an uncontested manner where neither one of you have to step foot in court, and you can do it in a thoughtful, planned, strategic way. While at the same time, you are given the space and time to grieve your losses. And I don't think our culture allows for that. So it's not surprising to me that you didn't have that opportunity, that you didn't even think that was an option. But looking at it in hindsight, I just noticed that it's still an emotional, a visceral reaction. You remember the date that you were served by that. It was a traumatic event. It cuts right to the core of who you are, your identity. The losses are immense. You lose your best friend. You lose your lover. You lose your status as a spouse, which in our culture gives you some status. You are going to lose, probably someone's going to lose their home, if not both of you. You're going to lose half of your wealth, either your income or your retirement, and half of the property. And then you're going to lose your identity. You're going to, if you've been a primary, worker, and then now you want to sort of transition into also being a 50-50 parent, co-parent, or vice versa. If you've been a primary caregiver, but now you're going to have to get a job. Like there's a whole bunch of things that are going on that are emotional. So I like to think of divorce as 80% emotional, 10% legal, 10% financial. And until you manage that 80%, that big piece of the emotional aspect of divorce, you're not going to be able to think straight and make good decisions about your children and your future financial security. So I don't think your experience is in any way, I think it's very common, is what I think, but I think it's sad because we could do better.
Excuse me, my first wife and I had no real assets. We had a house, no car, no stocks, no bonds, no jewelry. No, yeah, it was simple, very, very simple. And so and even my attorney could not believe that this was going on as long as it was because we didn't have anything to divide. I was willing to give up the house, sad but willing. And I was deposed. I was shocked, and even my attorney was shocked that I was deposed. So, not really knowing what the process is, as we're driving there and walking across the parking lot, I said, "Okay, do I have to answer all the questions?" "Yes, you do. You have to. You can't plead the fifth or anything of that nature. You can ask me, a question about the question." But then she gave me some of the best advice that I was ever given, and it actually made as hard as the process was, it made it fun for me. Because she said, when he asks a question, and this is what's interesting, my wife had a male attorney, I had a female attorney. She says, when he asks you a question, you can ask him to repeat it. You can say, "I don't understand," those kinds of responses initially to drag it out. If you're, pardon me, having trouble, like I am now, having trouble coming to giving the answer, but you do have to answer the questions. So I did that to him over and over again. "Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, could you be more specific?" And so on and so on. And then he asked me a question about that wonderful little form you fill out about your expenses and your income and expenses. Now, so there's some context, and I'll try to keep this very brief. And then I want to get into some of these steps that you offer because I think they're very important. He asked me about the form. Now, I filled the form out in July 1998, and it was asking me about the previous 12 months, meaning June, going back to July of the previous year. So the deposition was in August. And he asked me, "So is this form accurate?" And I said, "Yes." "So this form represents your assets and income for the previous 12 months. I said, "No." He says, "But you just said this form is accurate." "That's correct." "So does this represent the previous 12 months? And I said, "No." So I turned to my attorney and I said, "He doesn't get it. It's not for the previous 12 months, July going back to August of last year. It's for June going back to July of last year." So I had to, I asked, "Can I ask the stenographer to read back the question that he asked?" "Sure. Could you please?" She did. He still didn't get it, and I had to explain it to him. Now, I felt like I'd been run over by a truck when it was over. But we're walking back to her car, and she said, "In all the years of depositions, I have never seen anybody cause another attorney to spin in the wind like you did." And so that was the high point of that deposition, was that I treated that her attorney, to a little flight, if you will. But it wasn't to evade. It was like, "I can't believe I'm here. It cost me $140 in attorney's fees for a deposition that should never have happened." Those are the kinds of things that happen in a divorce where you go through this. And just one other point, not on this issue, but of a marriage seminar presenter, a Christian marriage seminar presenter that I found out about when I was working for a Christian station back in the 80s, early 90s. He talked about an experience he had with a couple. And the wife was just beating the daylights out of the husband verbally. I mean, oh, he's just off. He's such a whining without. And he's over there in the corner just cowering, oh my God, almost tears coming down his eyes, And finally says, if you two want to repair this, do you know who has to start first? Do you know? And he said, you do. But he wasn't pointing to one or the other. He was pointing to both of them. You both have to start. And that's where untangling your marriage, I think, begins, that both parties have to be willing to start. And I will tell you, my wife, my present wife, she and her ex cost him $120 because they did it themselves. They did it amicably. They still are friends to this day. They still text and talk with one another, and that's a reasonable solution for reasonable people right there. Do you find 1%, 5%, 10% of the divorces go like that?
Well, I'm not sure about the statistics about the majority of people do represent themselves. They don't use lawyers and they don't go to the litigation model. There are basically 4 ways to get divorced. You can do a kitchen table divorce, which is what you just alluded to with your current spouse and her former spouse. When that works well, when there's not a lot of assets, there's not a lot of conflict, people are both ready to sit down and fill out the forms and do it themselves. Do it yourself divorce. Then there's mediation, which is both of you going to one neutral person to be a mediator who's skillful in conflict resolution, can bring the two of you together, facilitate what would theoretically be a difficult conversation. Mediators cannot give legal advice, but they can facilitate conversations. That works well when both of you want an amicable solution. You don't want to spend a bunch of money. You both are on equal bargaining footing when you both know what the financial reality is. You both know what the situation is going to be with the kids. And you can get to yes. And mediators will always encourage clients to go to lawyers, separate lawyers, to review any documents before you sign them, because you should always have a document reviewed by an attorney before you sign it, because it's going to be legally binding. Then there's collaborative divorce, which is sort of like mediation on steroids. It's for the couple, right? It's kind of for the couple who understands that we're moving into some territory that neither of us are comfortable in. We don't know the language. We don't know the landscape. It's a foreign world. We are both grieving. We are both hurt. We are probably going to say stupid things that we are going to regret. And we should have some support. So having lawyers at the table, having a mental health coach, having a financial neutral, because somebody doesn't understand the finances as well. That's a great model for those kind of people. And then for the others and I almost wonder, based on your story, Richard, whether your wife just fell into that lawyer by accident, whether her friends or family who are well-meaning suggested that she go hire a shark to protect her, but they didn't even understand really what was at stake or how to divorce in a way that would not cause so much pain and suffering and additional cost. And so I think for your listeners, they just need to understand that even if your friends and family are trying to be well-meaning, most people have not had good divorce experiences. And so they're going to give you their own experience and suggest that you go to some lawyer that's going to, be a shark or a pit bull, or in my case, I used to be called a barracuda, get all these names of very tough animals. But that's not always what we need. We need more of the people like your lawyer, reasonable solutions for reasonable people. But you're not reasonable or rational, I would suggest, at the time when you are in that state of high intense anxiety, grief, worry about the future, sense of betrayal, feeling like you've been kicked in the gut, feeling like you are being attacked, and therefore you need to defend yourself. And in our culture, we go to lawyers as our white knights and as our defenders, and we need somebody to defend us from all the pain. And sometimes I just think that gets misplaced. The adversarial system is really only for about 2% of actual cases go to litigation, go to the final hearing with a judge. They all settle. 98% of cases settle. So the question for your listeners is, if my case is going to settle, most likely it will, unless there's a serious psychopathology going on in the background. in which case you have to have the court decide it for you. Okay, that may happen in 2% of the cases. But in 98% of the cases, it's going to settle. So how do you want to settle it? Exactly what your point was, Richard. You already made the offer at the very beginning, which is how it ended up 8 months later and $3,600. You're lucky. Like now it would be like $36,000 later. And yet it was the exact same thing that you started with. And I think the reason why people drag things out, and it's not always just lawyers being greedy, which sometimes it is, but it's also people not really ready to let go. They're not ready to let go. And so your ex-wife, even if she initiated it, psychologically, she might not have actually been ready to let go, which is why she allowed her lawyer to carry on like this, because she didn't know what to do. And nobody was telling her, like, don't do that. Like, you don't have to do that.
Yeah. We're talking with Nanci Smith. NanciSmithLaw.com is the website. And Untangling Your Marriage. Untangling Your Marriage. This is great advice, and we're going to continue getting some more of this advice from a legal professional, although you need to check with the laws in your own state, wherever you're listening, or your own country, if you are listening outside of the United States, to the podcast or video cast here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it's not often that we get the opportunity to question someone, an expert, if you will, or at the very least, if you don't consider yourself an expert, at least someone who knows the ins and outs of a process. And in this case, the process, which is on a legal level, it is a lawsuit. I always thought divorce was just divorce. And then, of course, as I said earlier, I was a basket case from May 1st to May 31st. But June 1st kicked in, and I don't know what happened, but suddenly the intellect kicked in and going, wait a minute, this is a community property state as well as the community responsibility state. She's 50% responsible for what's happening here, just like I am 50% responsible for what's happening here. And I began to do the research, and of course I had the attorney and everything. And I'm also grateful to my parents for supporting me in that regard. It's nice that they were there. They actually helped me with the initial retainer. So I'm grateful to them. Of course, I had to pay the rest, but that's okay. I survived. One of the other things I should also mention, Nanci, in spite of all of the energies that I have shared with my experiences on this program, I have to also acknowledge, and I look back on the 15 years of my first marriage, and it's not like, well, yeah, the first 10 years were good. It was the last 5 that, no, it wasn't even that. It was, I can look back and we had some wonderful, absolutely spectacular times. I remember some Christmases that were very creative, some other holidays, even our honeymoon, and other trips that we were able to take, and the schooling that she went through that I helped support her with, and so on and so on and so on. So, folks, I'm not bitter towards my former wife by any means. I wish that it had gone on. I still have a love for her in my heart. The divorce process was a very short-term, temporary thing. Although it makes me think of a Woody Allen line where he says, well, me and Quasimodo, we were debating whether to go on vacation or get a divorce. And we decided to get the divorce because a vacation you only have for 2 weeks, and the divorce you have for the rest of your life. It's I always thought that I would challenge my parents in the years that they had been married up to that point. My eldest sister, who passed away last March, she was married for 40 years. My other sisters, 30, 35, probably close to 40 years for the 3 of them. I don't know the exact numbers. I just celebrated my 20th anniversary with my present wife, but we've been together 25. It's like, yes, there's the grieving, but then you got to take a look at, it wasn't all bad. I mean, because you decided to get married, you decided to get together. Let's talk a little bit about the pros and the cons in regards to the upsides and the downsides of working on creating this kind of a collaborative divorce, if you will?
Sure. So a collaborative divorce is first and foremost a process. It's been around for 30 years. The lawyers who practice it have been trained by the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals. We do ongoing training with each other. We're part of practice groups, which are interdisciplinary. They have lawyers, mental health professionals, and financial neutrals as part of the team. So when you're interviewing an attorney and you're asking for a collaborative divorce, make sure that that the lawyers know what they're talking about and they actually practice a true collaborative model. Part of the model requires a participation agreement. And that's a document that binds us all together. And in that, it lays out our rights and our responsibilities and what the expectations are for clients, and that we engage in good faith. We share transparently financial information. We don't engage in financial discovery like a deposition like you had, which is an awful situation in a family court case. That was really an opportunity to make you have a bad day. That was not about actually getting information. So we don't abuse the process, we don't abuse the system, but we are giving up certain rights. The clients are giving up certain rights to engage in a collaborative process. You give up the right to be deposed. You give up the right to go to court and have a hearing. You give up the right to let a judge decide your fate and your future. Instead, you take responsibility for that. You're going to show up at the table like a grown-up, even if you're feeling your worst. You're going to show up and be your best self, even if you don't feel like it. You're going to have support. You're going to have your lawyer there to help you and support you and be your coach, not to steamroll or bully the other side into submission. That's not what we do. The lawyers are not bullies. We're there to contain, to create the container and to move the process forward. And so one of the benefits then is you get the support of the team member that you need at that time. So if you need to understand finances, you get the financial neutral to understand it, lay it out for you, collect all the data, analyze it, help you understand what the long-term cash flow is going to look like, and what the impact of a settlement is going to be on you financially into the future. That's a great benefit that is not usually available in a traditional model. If you are having communication issues because you do not trust each other and or contempt has set in and you just really cannot stand your spouse at this moment and you're having a really hard time like looking them in the eye and even having a conversation, that's when the coach comes in, the mental health coach, who is very skillful in family system dynamics, in grief, in divorce, in couple dynamics, because whatever the dynamic is between the two of you is going to show up. It's going to continue to show up. It's not going to just magically go away. So we're all primed for it. The professionals are primed for it. We're not going to fall into your traps. We're going to be aware of what they are in advance. We're not going to intentionally hurt each other. We're not going to look for your Achilles heel and your weakness so that I can exploit it. It's just so that I can actually avoid it. Like, I don't want to hurt you and I don't want to make your life miserable. I'm here to just help you guys through a process. So my loyalty is to my own client. I have a confidential relationship with my client, but I'm not out to screw over my client's spouse. There's no benefit in that for me. And it doesn't serve my client in the long run because my client has to have usually a post-divorce relationship with this person. And they might like to be friends and they might like to have family gatherings together. They may want to present a united front to their children and show how grown-ups can handle adversity and differences of opinions and conflict in a way that allows them to emerge healthy and wholehearted instead of bitter and resentful. So there's a lot of opportunity for personal growth in a collaborative model. The downside is, this is the main risk, is that if you are not well suited to the process and you don't have that ability for insight, or your spouse doesn't, or your spouse has a serious psychological personality disorder that's diagnosed, and everybody likes to throw around that my spouse is a narcissist, but not everybody is. But if yours is, then we want to know about that. And that's probably not going to be a good process because we're going to all get excited about it. We're going to think we're making progress. And all of a sudden, whoa, no, the hand is going to come up. Some crazy thing's going to happen and the process will fail. And if the process fails, then the lawyers withdraw and you both have to go on and find litigation counsel. And so that increases the cost. Yeah. So that disqualification clause is part of our what weaves us all together, and it's the incentive to keep us all together. It's an incentive to make sure that you're correct for the process, and it's our incentive to just do the work, roll up our sleeves, no matter how difficult it gets. We're not bailing, no one's leaving, we're not going to run away. We can handle all your intensity. It doesn't matter what your situation is. We can handle it. Most of us have had 20, 30 years of experience. Nothing you say to us is going to surprise us or shock us. We can handle it. We just want you to work through it at a time and then in a pace that makes sense for both of you. So those are the benefits. Those are the risks. And I really just think it's an opportunity for people to do the work so that for their next relationships, they can show up in a wholehearted way and they're not going to be ruined by their divorce process, which happens. People end up very bitter and feel a lot of resentment toward their ex-spouses for ruining their lives. And I just think you can flip that paradigm and just start taking radical responsibility for yourself and for the future of your relationship with your spouse, your children, your extended family, all of it.
Nanci A. Smith, attorney at law, nancysmith.com, and that's Nanci with an I. nancysmithlaw.com is the website. We encourage you to go there, find out more. Also find out more about the book, the work that she is doing through the book, Untangling Your Marriage, a guide to collaborative divorce, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And Nanci, this is obviously, it's a process that's been around for, God, I don't know how many years.
About 30.
About 30 years. But divorce in general has probably been around for a whole lot, maybe several hundred years, or I don't know, 1,000 for all I know. Usually, I guess, if you're in royalty, you say, I don't want to be with you anymore, and they take your head off.
So I guess we've made some progress.
A little. I think we have a little bit. One aspect too, in terms of this process, and I experienced this. You need to know what's applicable on the state level, because every state is the one that determines all of the rules of divorce, and what might get thrown into the list of conditions at the end of the divorce decree in terms of what's federal. And it was one of those things that I found real interesting and I learned a great deal about. Her attorney threw into the decree one line, that neither party may discharge the community debt through bankruptcy. And of course, I researched that, checked with not only my attorney, but a bankruptcy attorney, and said, nah, it's not binding because divorce is a state level element and bankruptcy is federal, and federal trumps, no pun intended, state. So that's what I had to do when the divorce was over, because I was saddled with all the debt, which I suppose is rare, but again, I could have contested it, but it would have dragged it on longer, and I didn't. I just wanted out. And the other element too is that during this collaborative process, you don't want to be doing things that are going to, behind the scenes, they're going to undermine the process. My former wife, she went to school to become a massage therapist, and they have to renew their license every year. And of course, she's claiming that she can't work. And then my attorney found out that December, before they finally settled, she'd renewed her license. But why are you renewing your license if you can't work? So as soon as they knew that we had found out, they settled. Because she'd made a mistake, obviously, from legal standpoint. You know, you can't play both sides of the street. You just can't do that. As far as my business is concerned, and I had this audio business, production, and they wanted me to value it. I said, it has no value. I am it. So unless I'm doing it, there's no value to it. I mean, I can do it on any equipment that I get my hands on. Well, you need to put a value on it. I said, okay, $10,000, you know, as if they were going to get any. You want to take my all of my old equipment, used equipment, to a yard sale and see what you can get? Maybe you'll get $100 for all of it. I never fully understood that aspect of it, whereas because there were no real assets in the business. The business was a service that I would provide, as opposed to a product, and then you have assets. So it was really strange. I want to ask you a little bit about your background. Why? Because my attorney, I think or maybe one more case, she had one more and she got out of the business because she just couldn't do it anymore in dealing with these people, these other attorneys who were, the snakes, if you will. Why would you, what is it that intrigued you and still does, obviously the collaborative aspect of it, about helping people through this process?
Sure. Well, obviously, when I was little and thinking I was going to be a lawyer, I wasn't thinking I was going to be a divorce lawyer. I thought I would do something big and important, like international human rights or something. And I was called into the law since I was little. I was about 7 when I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. So that gave me the opportunity to study philosophy in college, and I wasn't really too uptight about where I'd go to law school. I figured eventually I'd be a lawyer. So I came to Vermont, where I did a master's in environmental law. And then I graduated in 92. And at the time, my husband, who I met in law school, had this very persuasive argument to my 25-year-old mind, which was, Nan, don't you want to just stay in Vermont and let this be our life instead of that time in our lives that we look back on fondly and think, oh, wasn't that wonderful? So I said, okay, sure, I'll stay in Vermont. And it wasn't my plan. But then I had to get a job in 1992, and it was a bit of a depression at that time. And I found a job in a general practice law firm. And one of my mentors practiced in family court. And I had done a little bit of domestic violence work in law school, and I found that pretty satisfying because I like to fight bullies, and I'm a scrappy kind of girl, and I used to like to fight. And I think I was drawn to it because it was like a socially acceptable outlet for my aggressive tendencies. So I was drawn to litigation. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be in court. I liked standing up to bullies. I liked to advocate for the underdog. So I always had that sort of fighting spirit. And then about 15 years into it, I was like, holy smokes, I don't think this is good for families. I just started realizing, I just had an epiphany one day after a particularly robust court situation. I think that was when that lady called me a barracuda. She sort of spat it at me. And I didn't take pleasure in that. I wasn't feeling proud about it. I was thinking, oh, I don't think this is good for my higher soul and spirit. So then that's when I found out about collaborative divorce. And I thought, this is a really sensible approach that will allow me to do good work and still be a good human being and not get caught up in that adversarial nature of ruining people's families. Because those people have to go home and deal with each other at some point. I go home after theoretically I get paid and I can go home, but I don't want to leave a trail of destruction and ruin children's lives and their parents' lives. I just didn't want to do that anymore. So this is a perfect merger. I can help people transition through the divorce process. I have a lot of empathy, and my experience and having my personal experience about it allows me, I think, with some degree of humility and gratitude to just kind of help people get through the process and emerge healthier and wholehearted so that they don't have to feel like somehow this was like a failure in their lives.
That's one of the things too, is feeling like a failure. If I dwelled on it too long, I would start feeling that way. I looked at it as a learning experience. I looked at it as a way to make the next relationship last as long as it possibly could, that I was going to do everything in my power. I want to ask you, first of all, who are Natalie and Greg, and why are you where you are because of them?
Thank you. So I struggled with who to dedicate the book to. And so Natalie is my daughter. And Greg is my ex-husband, my former husband. And he and I are not close, which is kind of unfortunate. And it was a tough divorce. It wasn't a collaborative divorce. So I can, be one of those do as I say, not as I do kind of people. But there's value in that. If you've gone down a path and it's the wrong way, you can actually provide quite a bit of guidance to other people to avoid that, the pitfalls that you've experienced personally. And I just, I grew a lot through the divorce process, through the marriage. And as you said and alluded to, you want to be able to look back and look at some of those positive things, and you grow together. But I find it so interesting that a marriage is this one thing that we judge its success by how long it lasts. If it lasts a long time and you're unsatisfied and you're not getting your needs met and you're at opposite ends and you're not loving and supportive and joyful and your kids aren't seeing that, why are we saying that that's, that you should continue to suck it up and stay in it if it's not serving you, or if it's worse, if there's, emotional abuse, or there's, mistreatment of some sort. So, I think we all grow, we learn. What you want when you're 25 may not be what you want when you're 45. And there should just, I don't know, I think there should be like a pass and maybe a renegotiation every 7 or 10 years, and just check in with each other, make sure you're really still on the same page and that you're feeling the love. And if you're not, then there are other opportunities to go deeper into your relationship issues, go into joint counseling or do discernment counseling or something, a deep dive into deciding whether you really want, whether a divorce is the only option or whether you just need to do some additional work on yourselves, either individually or as a couple.
Yeah. Well, lessons learned, life lessons, or what have you, however you want to phrase it. I think it's important for us to be able to look at these experiences from that perspective rather than success and failure. I would rather be happy than right. And it's not one of those situations where, I understand the phrase happy wife, happy life, but what about me? And again, I'm not trying to put myself above her, or anything. That's why I dislike a lot of the stereotypical examples in movies and television. The dopey husband who, and then the supposedly the woman who wears the pants in the family attitude, where they're both trying to get one up on the other. And it's like, what? No, I don't ever remember seeing that with my parents. I don't even remember ever seeing them argue with one another. They might have slightly heated conversations that I can recall, but it was never, anything other than that. They went through marriage encounter back in the 70s. They even came to us as kids and said, we'd like to do this thing, and it's going to take some time away from you kids. And we basically said, look, if that's what you want to do, go for it. We can take care of ourselves. There were 6 of us. We can deal. I had 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters, and a younger brother. So they went through that, and maybe they felt like they were having problems, and that's maybe why they went through a marriage encounter. I don't know, because I didn't ever see that. It was a very loving home, very small home, 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And as I said before, 4 sisters. And we survived.
I think that's a real testament to your parents. I think in today's culture, we often include the children in too many adult decisions and adult conversations. And people like to use the children as weapons in a divorce and get the kids to ally with them in some way. And so you start to overshare information under the guise of, well, they need to know the truth. And I would submit that the people themselves don't even know the truth yet until you've been through at least some counseling and you've taken the time to understand your role in the disintegration of a marriage, and not to involve the children, like never involve the children. So credit to your parents for keeping it out of your consciousness as a young person.
I acknowledge and honor them all the time with what they did to raise the 6 of us. It's funny too, because I've even been asked, your folks must have sacrificed a lot. I put that question to them. I've interviewed them on this program some years ago, and I even put that question to them. I says, did you guys sacrifice anything? They said, absolutely, we sacrificed nothing, because we wanted a big family and whatever came along with that. So there was no sacrifice. And I that's why I don't like that. I don't like using that word when it comes to certain things. Would I have liked to have done this, that, or the other thing? Maybe. But I'm not. I'm doing this, and I'm having a great time doing it. And, there's no sacrifice. I personally believe in reincarnation, and if I want to do that, I'll come back and do that. I'll come back and do that. We're talking with Nanci Smith. Nanci Smith, attorney at law, nancysmithlaw.com. That's Nanci with an I. All right, nancysmithlaw.com will be linked to your website, Nanci, so that people can find out more about you and the work, as well as the book that you have put together for us who need collaborative divorce, Untangling Your Marriage, a guide to collaborative divorce, here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it's always a pleasure to have people here who can help weave through some of the chaos and entanglements that are there in life, and find, as we talked at the beginning, Nanci, about new paradigms for a new world. I wish that we could, Hollywood. My heart goes out to these people who, especially who are in the limelight, who they go through these just horrific processes. I mean, my heart really went out to, for example, and now I cannot remember the actor's name, who went through a very public trial, where the wife, whether she was telling the truth or not, obviously, Johnny Depp, that was his name. And I just thought, not just because I like him as an actor, okay, but it's like, and I'm not taking sides because I'm a male, but I just really felt like he was that guy, kind of, oh man, don't stop beating me up, Yeah, I kind of saw that in his face, that he was really hurt by this whole thing, and he really didn't want to go through it. And I don't think she did either. And it just exploded into this show almost, and I don't know who's right and who's wrong because I don't know the details, so I'm not going there. All I'm saying is that I had compassion in that respect. I was saddened by the fact that they had to go through that, or anybody has to go through that, especially in the public. Oh, gee whiz. Have you ever had any cases like that where it was rather semi-public and so forth? Not necessarily nationally, but maybe in a region?
Yeah. So engaging in a public display of your family and personal madness is never a good idea. And in a collaborative model, it's discreet, it's private. We take care of our business in a small, four of you are going to know what's going on. The two lawyers, a mental health coach, and a financial neutral, and maybe an adjunct mental health professional who works with the couple. That they're the ones who are going to know your business. And I think people have choices in life about how they're going to engage in their dissolution of their marriage. And you can choose to have a public display in court, or you can choose a non-adversarial divorce process like a collaborative divorce. And even if collaborative divorce seems like maybe too much process for your listener, or maybe they don't think that they need it all, I would remind the listeners that collaborative divorce is both a process and a mindset. So you can bring the collaborative mindset to whatever process you are choosing, even if you end up in court. Just because you end up in court doesn't mean you have to engage in all that nastiness and or feel it or embody it or give it back in that same way, because courts are not impressed by that. They are going for who's making the most reasonable approach. They're not looking for the most dramatic, or you're not scoring points by being a jerk to the other person's client. You don't score points by that. So by the end of the day, you want to make a choice about how do you want to show up for your divorce, what process is going to serve your needs, it's going to align with your values of decency, transparency, integrity, mutual respect. Like, these are the things that you want to focus on when you are hurting and when you are dissolving an important primary relationship. And I think that's where the choice is. And, I don't know, did you ever read the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu? Have you read that one?
Honestly, have not. I will have to pick that up.
I really encourage it. And I talk about it in the book, about joy. And a lot of times we don't think about joy, or maybe we think about joy as an emotion, but these two, and I figured the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu were reliable sources. And what they ultimately concluded is that joy is a state of being. It's a state of mind and a state of heart. And there are 8 pillars to joy. And of the mind, the pillars of the mind are perspective, humility, humor, and acceptance. And the pillars of the heart are forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, generosity. And if you can apply those concepts to yourself and your spouse as you're going through a divorce, what a gift. What a gift for yourself, for your spouse, for your children, for the community. It's a way to go to world peace.
I just found it. I just found the book. It's available on Audible, ladies and gentlemen. And I happen to have that a service, so I will download that immediately and start listening to it. It should be very good. I'm looking forward to that. Nanci, before we wrap things up, I'd like to know how because you made reference to this very briefly earlier about how the type of divorce that you were dealing with was sort of, I guess I'll put it this way, correct me if I'm wrong, was a little vexing to your soul. How was your inner life and philosophy of living by a particular philosophy? How was it, and how has it changed for you to this day?
What a wonderful question. I think I was fooling myself back in the day. Like, I thought I could have a personal life that was a spiritual life, and then have a professional life that was in the trenches, and somehow justify it and keep it together. But I think, truthfully, looking back, I think that's really hard. I think it's really hard to be that unintegrated. And so I feel like over time, the practice, that's why I switched out of the litigation model into the collaborative model and into consultations, because it's more integrated with how I truly want to live my life.
Mm. Well, I am grateful and I honor you for that choice. You are helping to make this a better place, to take those new ways of living into the future. And because the old ways don't work, all you have to do is take a look around. They're not working. Look at the if you will, the chaos. But I've heard many different perspectives on chaos, and that out of chaos can come clarity and so forth. And of course, we have in this country, in our founding documents, we do have these inalienable rights. They only mentioned 3, which is rather interesting. They had lots of parchment. It wasn't like they were going to run out. But they do mention 3: life, liberty, and happiness. I'm sorry, pursuit of happiness. I'll still equate that with joy, because when we are happy, truly happy, then we're in our integrity. We are living a life that is meaningful, and we're, as you are, of service to the people who seek you out. And I hope people will through your website, nancysmithlaw.com. And again, folks, that's Nanci with an I, nancysmithlaw.com. And also the book we encourage you to get is Untangle Your Marriage, as we talked with her here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Nanci Smith, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been a real pleasure. It's given me some insights, not by any means for anything to the future, but for maybe doing a little more processing about the past, in that respect. Never forgetting that it takes 2 to tango, as the phrase goes, and that this wasn't her fault, this wasn't my fault, it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just stuff that happens, and these are experiences that we're going to have. As someone said to me once, frustrated the heck out of me when they said this, Richard, you wrote this script. And if you want to rewrite it, you can do that. But you wrote this script. This is your script, okay? And I own that. It's my script, yes, and it's her script, as it is my script and my present wife's script. And so if we want to change things, if we want to make things different, we can do that. And I thank you so much for sharing your insights in how to rewrite the script.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Good luck.
I do have 3 final questions for you, though.
Oh, sure.
I ask all of my guests these questions. And I will ask those of you. But first, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m. We stream live at those times at richarddugan.com. We also have a 9 a.m. Wednesday broadcast That's our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. I sometimes get going a little fast there. I understand. But we're on YouTube where you can watch these interviews. And just remember, we are going to be linked to our guest website, nancysmithlaw.com. So don't forget about that. And we also ask that you take time to go within and listen to that still small voice. And Nanci, every time I get to this part, I think, did we talk about that? No, we did not. And I should have, we'll have you back and we'll kind of open the door for that. But we want you to take time to listen to that still small voice. Spend time in that quiet, peaceful place. If you're going through something like this and you want to consider collaborative divorce, then sit still and ask the questions, put it out there. I really would rather not have the drama. Please guide me to where I need to go. Well, there we are, nancysmithlaw.com. We're guiding you. The still small voice is guiding you. Be that as it may, if you'd also like to support us financially, we'd be grateful for any amount. We have a PayPal account. It's there for your security as well as ours. And when you go to contribute, we are so grateful for that. They're going to ask you for an email address. Quite simply, it's richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. With all of that out of the way, we go to our three final questions for our guest. And the first is, who is Nanci A. Smith?
At this stage, today, I am an advocate for people to move through divorce with dignity and mutual respect. So I'm a paradigm shifter in the sphere of divorce.
What is your life's purpose?
To empower people to feel good about themselves, even when they are leaving an important relationship.
And finally, what was your best day?
Today's my best day. Every day is the best day. Every day I'm alive is a great day. I'm very, very grateful for all the blessings that I have and to be able to be of service. And I really just appreciate the opportunity.
Well, once again, Nanci, thank you so much for being with us. Nanci Smith, and again, for sharing with us Untangling Your Marriage. We look forward to having you back again.
Thank you. I'd love to.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, as we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal and Jeanette. I'm still listening.